please allow me to introduce you to two phenomenal peer leaders who have been achieving really incredible outcomes with their statewide peer networks in North Carolina and Texas, not the least of which are their peer-run Warmlines. So Cherene Caraco is the founder and CEO of Promise Resource Network, located in Charlotte, North Carolina. PRN is a survivor-led community united by resilience who use their wisdom to ignite social change. And Anna Gray is a founding director of Prosumers International, based in San Antonio, Texas. Not just consumers, prosumers are people who are proactive in their recovery and who give back to the community to empower and inspire all people to thrive. Anna and Cherene, we are just so thrilled and honored to welcome you virtually to Maryland. And we're excited to hear about how you've built up and expanded your peer-run Warmlines in the context of talking about 988, knowing so many more people will be accessing for resources. I think there's just such incredible opportunity to highlight and promote the power of peer support and what we can do to help people reactivate their own, capacities for healing, for recovery, for wellness, and for supporting each other. So thank you for being here and for sharing your wisdom with us. And with no further ado, Cherene, I'm going to turn it over to you to tell us all about what's happening with your Warmline in North Carolina.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Katie, for the invite. And it's good to see you again, Anna. We actually just saw each other within the last couple of weeks in another meeting. It's a small community, is it not? I am so excited to hear and talk about Warmline as a crisis diversion, as a peer-run alternative to police involvement, to 911, to the use of involuntary treatment, and certainly share with each of you how our Warmline is set up, some of our lessons learned, and because I'm a little bit of a data nerd, because you all know that we have to justify and we have to make our good, solid arguments for why these types of alternatives are needed, I'm going to be sharing with you some of our data. So I am hopeful that my screen is going to work, and I am going to project with you a PowerPoint that I put together for this group. All right, show of hands or thumbs, can you see it? Beautiful. Okay, so we're going to be talking today in my session about the Warmline Crisis Prevention and Diversion Program that we have here in North Carolina. As Katie said, my name is Cherene Caraco. I am the Chief Executive Officer of a peer-run organization in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I also operate our statewide movement of people with lived experience around mental health recovery to get involved in legislative change. So part of the Warmline is actually in response to activation that we've done around the state, and part of it is response to some of the changes that we need within our state. To give you just a little bit of context, I won't go through this in depth, but Promise Resource Network is been around for 17 years. I actually started the organization without the anticipation that we would have over 100 people now that work at PRN, all of whom are survivors of complex trauma, in suicide, psychiatric survivors, in recovery from substance use challenges, former houselessness, as well as incarceration, and all of the ancillary experiences that we all know can accompany having diagnoses of mental health issues. We are a peer-run, free, open access, zero barrier organization. We serve several thousand people a month that are uninsured, underinsured, most of whom, frankly, have been kicked out of traditional services or have walked away from traditional services. So we are a safety net in our community for our community. These are just some of the programs that we operate, including the Warmline. We also operate a respite, which is going to become a little bit relevant in the conversation about the Warmline. We do a lot of work in forensic peer support, from reentry through diversion on the front end and specialty courts, and then do a lot around home and supporting people to get off the streets into homes. You'll see the breadth of everything that we do at PRN. If you're interested, you can go to our website. We do work at the intersection of three things. The first one is peer-to-peer support. Every program that we offer is peer operated, peer staffed, and has its foundation as peer-to-peer. But we also do a lot of work around system transformation, bringing in alternatives to traditional treatments, pushing the status quo around the way traditional systems operate and view those of us with mental health issues, and moving away from pathology-based paradigms to ones that really embrace trauma-informed and resilience and recovery. And then the third aim that we have is social justice. So we work at legislative change. We have actually had 4 policies with bipartisan support this last legislative session, all aimed at peer run alternatives, gathering data around the use of involuntary treatment, alternatives to police response, and then the last one was about peer support and building the integrity and quality of the peer workforce. So just a little bit of a snippet. So as we all know, with 988 coming in, there is a lot of conversation and planning from states about how do we build out an effective array of prevention, diversion, and response that don't rely on police, do not use jail confinement, or even we talk a lot about involuntary treatment as well at PRN and Peer Voice North Carolina. So what do those alternatives look like? And as the country really starts grappling with this, the FCC has endorsed the use of peer-run warmlines, peer-run respites, peer-run mobile teams as a way to really enrich the crisis alternative continuum. So I'm very pleased to see that that has happened. There we go. And so I'm going to talk more today about standalone peer-run warmlines. That is, warmlines that are operated by completely peer-operated organizations, health agencies and employee peer specialists, or crisis lines that also have a peer-run space to them. We are an independent, completely peer-run organization that operates our warmline. One of the greatest advantages that we have found is it is one of the most accessible way for people to receive supports, regardless of age and ethnicity and gender and race and socioeconomic experience. No insurance is required. And for us, it also spans geography and it works. So I'm going to show you some of the data that we have collected around it. And so when we talk about this today for my presentation, we're going to be talking about peer operated, led, and staffed organizations. We utilize the fidelity to the COSP called the FACET, the Consumer Operated Services Program. So as an organization, we are utilizing that as our guidelines. And then just like all peer operated organizations, on the right-hand side are some of our principles and our values. We do not use clinical staff, clinical language, or use a paradigm that is rooted in pathology-based ways of understanding mental health. And on the left-hand side, we're talking about warmlines today, but I would be remiss if I didn't also mention that there are a whole host of other peer-run options, including respites and wellness centers, non-police community response teams, and the use of things like psychiatric advanced directives, depending on your state and how it's written into statute. So I'm going to make that caveat on that one. So that is, we are talking about the top in my presentation. That is the COSP peer run organization, not a peer run program, which is in the middle, which is a behavioral health agency that may have a program staffed and operated by people with lived experience, and not the third one, which is behavioral health agencies that simply employ peer supporters. So I just wanted to make that little note as we talk about this. And so this is our visual for our warmline. We are a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week warmline. So some warmlines you will see work certain days of the week, certain hours of the day. We are 24/7. We did not expect it to be as heavily utilized as it has become, and to span not only our state, but national and international reach. It's been really amazing. I do think that our visual has helped to engage people into making that phone call because it is confidential and it is peer run. And we have gathered some data about why people will call a peer warm line rather than a crisis line. But this is our visual for this. This comes in magnet that we send out to people. They go in the refrigerator, but also in postcards that we share with people if they want it. So our warm line, we actually operated one from 2005 to 2010. And it was kind of a small warm line. These were the days of flip phones. So we would literally sort of hand off our flip phones, and it was not sophisticated at the time. We didn't have a great volume, and other things took priority. So we ended our warm line in 2010. However, with COVID, we as a team, within 24 hours of our state going on lockdown, we knew as people with lived experience that disconnection, isolation, fear, having lack of security and lack of predictability all result in higher rates of suicide completion, overdoses, domestic violence, child abuse, things like that, and that we had to really mobilize to meet the needs of our community and put supports in their hands. So the first thing that we did was relaunch our warm line. It was supposed to be a countywide warm line. It quickly turned into a statewide warm line, quickly, and you will see the numbers in a minute. Right now, we have 32 warm line operators. We have a director and 14 leads, all of whom have lived experience of suicide attempts, psychiatric hospitalization, and mental health related crises. We have a very robust technology system. So our phone system is called Telsio, and it tracks certain data sets that we utilize. But our data management system is called iCarol, which is the same system that 211 utilizes. It yields a lot of information that we can then cull and use for reporting. I receive weekly reports from our warm line that is very comprehensive and tracks everything from time of day, location of callers, the reason why people are calling, what our response was to the callers, any use of mobile crisis teams, 911, any adverse experiences I get on a weekly basis. So I'm going to share our most recent report with you. We do require a variety of trainings for our warm line operators, and I listed them in case they were of interest to all of you. We do require emotional CPR, alternatives to suicide, intentional peer support when the conversation turns to suicide, and we do a whole robust orientation to our warm line. We have a peer training that we do that's about 60 hours called Peer Academy that we developed many, many years ago and have trained thousands of people in. And then, of course, we do training on recovery, domestic violence, and some other things. So that being said, if I can get my computer to work, let's look at some of the data. So this is the data that I have from March 17th, 2021 to this past week, February 27th. We have had 27,373 callers on our warm line. So we went from a local to a very heavily utilized warm line very quickly. We also are an outreach line, so not simply an in-reach line, which means that we can develop supports with people that we call out if they want. We can develop those types of plans and resources with people we will call back to check in, to say, we're thinking of you. Are you okay? Those types of things. So we've had around 5,300 outreach calls since then. We do average around 600. It's actually more like 650 to 700 calls a week. And in case you're interested, I put our call volume times at the top because it was really interesting to us when we started looking at this. So you'll see the most heavily utilized is actually 1 p.m. to 8 p.m. We didn't expect that. We thought it was going to be overnight, of course, when everything else is shut down. It isn't. It's at 1 p.m. to 8 p.m. time spot, followed by 6 a.m. to 1 p.m., which is interesting, 8 p.m. to 12 a.m., and 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. So this is my data as of February 27th. The reasons people call are all over the board. It can be anything from I'm lonely, I'm bored, I can't sleep, I'm struggling with this particular issue, I'm considering suicide, I have experienced trauma or loss or grief. It is really all over the map. And I'll show you how we track it and some of the most prevalent reasons why people have called our warm line. I am also just so proud of this. In the nearly 27,500 calls, we've had 0 suicides, 0 overdoses, 0 involuntary hospitalizations, and we have not made 1 911 call. We have called mobile crisis twice. Both have been very disappointing, and so we have another approach to support people from a mobile perspective, but the data really speaks for itself. So in addition to our statewide warm line, this is just a smattering of the other states, countries that people are calling from. It was never intended to be this big, but we do get a lot of calls from out of state. We get calls from Canada, we get calls from Hawaii, just all over the place. The way that we typically track this in our state is it's divided by county, city, town, and region. And I get those data sets every week, so I know where people are calling from and the most heavily utilized. And then as an ancillary, we do it by state as well for our outside state callers. So just some miscellaneous things. As I said, we haven't had any overdoses, suicides, or 911 calls. It's doing its job. We have a peer run respite. So we have had many callers that have decided to become a guest at our respite as an alternative to going to the emergency department, as an alternative to involuntary commitment. So we're very pleased about that. It's our current annual operating budget is about $750,000. We started at $250,000 and it's just grown so rapidly. And we have robust data around the impact of COVID on mental health, which I'm so pleased, because if anybody decides that they want to do a deep dive into COVID and how it has affected people on the ground, we have so much information that we can share to understand that better. We track our calls, the reasons for our calls, through the 8 dimensions of wellness. And I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. These are trends for the end of the 27th. We had 158 follow-up calls. Our average time for that week on initial calls was 15 minutes, and for repeat callers was 10 minutes. We go up to an hour longer if needed. So we are not one of those organizations that says you have a 15-minute limit or 30-minute limit on your Warmline call. And then for the week ending 2/13, if you just look at the numbers, the most prevalent reason people call is because of mental health, right? So if you look at that week alone, 516 callers called because of mental health related issues, 248 for social related issues, 169 for home related issues or environmental. That is pretty much what the trend looks like, with mental health outweighing any other reason for people calling. And then we dig into, with our data, we dig into what the specific reasons around mental health are. In terms of where people are calling from or how they've heard about the Warmline, what we are finding is a good number of referrals are coming from crisis lines and other Warmlines. Because we don't have some of the barriers that some of the other ones have, people will refer folks to our Warmline. We are getting many more practitioners, hospitals, group homes, folks calling from all of these different environments calling us. Referrals from ACT teams. What the providers like about the Warmline is the after-hour conversations that they really are not designed for. People can call the Warmline and get the support that they need. And so we have found that our provider community is really starting to support the use of the Warmline, which is really great. And then we have a whole bunch of repeat callers, which for us is a great thing. That means they're getting something out of it. They're satisfied with the support that they're receiving. So we're not going to go through all of this. I know it looks overwhelming, but I just wanted to give you sort of some snapshots. So you will see each of the 8 dimensions of wellness here on the next few slides. And then under each, the reason for folks to call. So under physical, it could be anything from, I've tested positive for COVID. I'm afraid of getting COVID. I'm having issues with my medications, with weight, dealing with specific medical issues, not having access to primary care, not having access to testing. That's all over the map. Around mental health, just the volume of reasons, and this is from 1 week, right? So these are just the volume of reasons from 1 week why people are calling. It's everything from thinking about suicide to family conflict, being forced to take medications or forced into mental health treatments, being unhappy with mental health providers, self-harm, needing to history of IVCs. It's, again, all over the place why people call. And then as we go from this, you're going to see financial reasons people call, reasons around education or intellectual recovery, occupational recovery. As you can imagine, a lot of unemployment, fear about financial instability during COVID has been huge, feeling burnt out from jobs. And then we do spiritual, social, and we have environmental, and then miscellaneous reasons. So all of this is tracked on a weekly basis. A couple of things to just kind of give you that are noteworthy. We have an absolute upswing in the number of callers that identify as first responders, teachers, nurses, and an uptick from providers calling the Warmline. We do ask if it's appropriate for the person where they're at in the call and where they are at in their well-being, why they decide to call the Warmline and not a crisis line. The 4 top answers are on the board. Not surprising to any of us with lived experience. One is I want to talk and I need support. And I don't want to be sent to the hospital. I'm afraid police are going to show up or 911 is going to be called. I'm afraid mobile crisis is going to show up and I'm going to be hospitalized. And I'm afraid that I'm going to lose my job, my financial ability to take care of myself, my freedom. All of the reasons people call a warm line, at least ours, instead of calling a crisis line. Couple more slides to share. So some next steps for consideration. The cautionary tale, if we build it, they will come, especially if you build it and it's useful for people. The cautionary tale is we don't have geographical barriers on phones, right? And so while we intended to have a local warm line, you see what has happened. And that has created a lot of challenges for us in terms of infrastructure. We have found that the infrastructure can be very difficult to determine because what is needed is based on volume. And volume can be very unpredictable. And what we have seen throughout this time is it steadily increased to the point where we are at right now. Every state, I believe this so strongly, every state needs a warm line. Every state needs respites, community, peer community response teams, et cetera. These alternatives are saving lives. They are saving money. They are saving an overtaxed confined spaces like emergency departments, which were never supposed to be a treatment environment. They are not treatment environments. And frankly, for us, not involving police is really critical for our community. So they also create that alternative that is very heavily utilized. There are national attempts to create standards for peer-run warm lines, and there are national attempts at legislation, something that you may want to be interested in or think about with in Maryland if you're not involved in those things. There is also warm line accreditation, but I will tell you, I have looked into it. It is a little too clinical for my liking still. And as a peer-run warm line, we are very intentional about who we are, how we operate, and the values and the principles in which we operate. And to go in that direction at this point would take us further away from a peer-run authentic warm line or organization, frankly, than I'm comfortable being. And just a little something to consider. Some states have statewide warm lines, some are regional, some operate under the umbrella and have regional arms or regional local numbers. It really is dependent upon the state, how it's being done. Some are completely virtual. Ours is virtual. That means that we don't use a call center. All of our warm line operators are using a cell phone from their home to respond to warm line calls. Others are call center, physically go in. Pros and cons, if anybody has questions or there's discussion about that, I certainly can share with you some pros and cons. Some warm lines are connected through 988. We were asked in the beginning if we would come under 988, and we said no. The reason why is because 988, the first responders are clinicians, they're not peers. And what they are doing is risk assessment and then determining whether somebody can talk to a peer, right, in a peer-run warm line. The whole point of having a peer-run warm line is to have an accessible space for people to be comfortable to talk without fear of clinical assessments, without fear of mobile, all of these other things that people are talking about. And so while we can be connected to 988, we do not sit under 988 for a lot of reasons. One of our strongest recommendations is as we build out the crisis continuum, it's only as strong as the 988 operators and philosophy from which it operates. If they're simply going to triage and dispatch police or dispatch mobile crisis that doesn't work within a recovery paradigm, we are creating another set of middle people that really will end up resulting in exactly what we're trying to avoid, which is hospitalization, right? And what I'm finding is every state is operationalizing this a little bit differently. We have to have robust community-based alternatives, including warm lines that are mobile crisis teams that actually work within the integrity of recovery and resilience, that are operational and that have a paradigm of also do no harm rather than risk assessment and hospitalization. So that's Cherene talking from North Carolina in our peer-run organization and our peer-run warm line. That structure has not been built out around the country yet. And so that's a concern that I have as we're looking at 988. Okay, so I left with you my email. I left with you my phone number. If you're going to use my phone number, text is always the best way to get a hold of me. But that is my email if you decide that you want to reach out and have conversation. And with that, Katie, I'm going to turn it over to you. And if there's any dialogue to be had, I know I went through that fairly quickly because of the essence of time. But if there's any dialogue to be had, I am going to stay on.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Yes, it was a waterfall of data and insights. And I hear very much the idea of that you built this to serve, to work with folks and support people in North Carolina, like the importance of being regional, of being peer run. So I think I'm so curious to learn, Anna, from you about kind of what's the same in Texas, what's different, how has your process evolved? And then we will definitely have some time for Q&A towards the end of our time together. So if you can stick around, wonderful. If you want to put the questions in the chat now, go ahead and preload them. But Anna, I'm going to turn it over to you. Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity, and it is really exciting to be with you in this conversation. And I have to say, Cherene, what an amazing job. I really appreciate you taking the time to really outline, what is a warm line and what is the, when we talk about a peer run warm line, the peer part needs to be highlighted. There are all kinds of warm lines out there, and the National Lifeline states that it's basically a talk line, but there is a significant difference, I would say a state change, between a warm line and a peer run warm line, and the intention of a peer run warm line. So you did that so beautifully. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I would hope that when our systems in Texas grow up, they look like yours. Because you've been able to develop what I would say is a standard to reach. In Texas, we have not had that opportunity. So in Texas, we have predominantly 2 peer run lines. They are localized. One is in Fort Worth, which is Tarrant County, and the other one is in McAllen, Texas, which is in the Rio Grande Valley, so towards the south, bordering with Mexico. And I actually was instrumental in helping get the one in McAllen up and running. And so what I would like to speak to is, one, we absolutely do need peer run services, like the full array of services that are not clinical. So peer run respites with no clinical staff. We really advocated hard to get a peer run respite started in Texas. It was started through a local community center, public mental health center. And sure enough, the first person they hired to put over it was a clinician. So there are struggles and challenges. If you're out to start peer run programming, be aware that you are up against a very strong conversation around, yeah, y'all can run it, but we need to have a clinician present. And so in developing warm lines and developing peer run crisis, I invite you to network, to be with those who've actually succeeded in doing it, and to realize what are the conversations that are needed to be had. The other thing is, in developing a warm line, training is imperative. One of the things to be really cognizant of is that those of us who have lived experience of mental health issues grew up in the system. We were acculturated and indoctrinated in a medical model. And so that is what we're going to show up with. And unless we, in our recovery journey, we've encountered some strong messages that there are other ways of seeing what we go through, especially the idea that everything we do makes perfect sense inside of a trauma structure. We may still, when you're hiring people for your warm line, you may still need to work on a paradigm shift for them to be able to come at this from a fully pure way of looking at it, or it really is a whole worldview. It's beyond just a paradigm shift. It's really developing a worldview of peerness and support as healing. So these are going to be some of your challenges. I really was excited to hear the list of things that you, Cherene, you use for training. Intentional peer support and emotional CPR are incredible. I see emotional CPR as taking the idea of mutuality and actually having you get what it is. And so those together are imperative. I say all that to share, in Texas, we've struggled. And so we show why all of what Cherene talks about is important. Not having funding and trying to start a warm line on a shoestring with volunteers is a big challenge, even if you're wanting to keep it local. That was part of the challenge we had in developing the warm line in McAllen. Now, the warm line in McAllen is fully bilingual, so everyone who is hired to answer is bilingual. The warm line in Fort Worth is bilingual, but there's two different phone numbers. You call one if you want to speak in Spanish and one if you want to speak in English. So those are just two different models. But one of the things to consider is, how are you going to communicate with people who speak a language you may not speak? And how do we train the folks answering the line how to access those resources? Much beyond English and Spanish, we're using interpreter systems that you can get through AT&T and through other services like that, but that takes some training. The other thing is, be aware of who you're likely to get those calls from, because our warm lines, as Cherene said, started out to be local warm lines, and now they're statewide. And in fact, our partnership, even though I'm in San Antonio and Bexar County, we did help in a joint effort develop the warm line in the Valley, and now they serve Bexar County. And so instead of us choosing to start our own here, we made the decision to take what funding we did have for a warm line and beef up the warm line in McAllen, so that there was more availability and we weren't reinventing the wheel and hopefully maximizing the use of the funding we have. So part of pulling together a peer run warm line, it's great if you can have the system like Cherene has, but I will tell you, you could hear in what she was sharing, it didn't just sprout up that way. I mean, it wasn't like she went out one day and said, I'm going to have a warm line, and she had a budget of over $700,000 and the people who were trained to deal with it and could run it 24/7. It doesn't work that way. It's a matter of taking what you have and the vision you have and committing to it. And then finding those who want to commit to it as well, and thinking outside the box, creating collaborative efforts when somebody may have the calling system, and ask them to provide the calling system while you provide the people who answer the phone. You provide the training while somebody else may provide funding for staff or infrastructure. Think outside the box. Don't get caught up in, if I don't have it, I can't do it. But make sure you're well grounded in peerness and well grounded in that vision that you're out to accomplish. Because one of the things that tends to happen is we get very effective in what we do. You hear the numbers, and we have similar numbers. No one going to the hospital, no one having committed suicide. And our systems, and I'm talking about our public mental health systems, they like what they see. And so they may even want to jump in and support, but there's a difference between providing funding and letting us do it independently and autonomously, and a whole different ballgame when they say, well, come be part of our system. So be aware that there's some challenges in that. And it may seem like it, and I get a little radical on this, but a lot of our peers tend to be encouraged to go back and get degrees and licenses because they're so good at what they do. You cannot be a clinician and a peer at the same time. It just doesn't work. So choose which one you're going to be in the moment if you have both of those hats, but it is extremely difficult to maintain your peerness and have to worry about maintaining a license. And I say that as someone who is clinically trained and as someone who was going down that highway. So I don't mean that in any way to slight somebody, but actually to use it as empowerment. Claim who you are and be that proudly. But when it comes to saying you provide peer services, we're there to have people highlight and be empowered around their self-determination, not to judge what it is they are determining for their life. And one of the things I say about peer services is that we are called upon to do something that no other professional is. We're asked to suspend our own humanity in the service of another. Our human knee-jerk response is to help, is to fix, is to reduce suffering for the sake of us not feeling bad because somebody else is suffering. That's automatic humanness. And those are the things we're asked to suspend when we go before another and say, what do you want? What does that feel like for you? Share your experience. I want to be with that suffering. I want to hold that hope. And that takes an incredible amount of vulnerability and courage. So that's what we bring to Warmlines that makes such a difference in the outcomes that we see. So many of our callers, and you know, you can see all of the topics that are shared. Ultimately, it's someone seeking connection. It's someone saying, hey, see me, I'm here, and I'm having an experience and I don't know what to do with it. Or if I know what to do with it, I need some validation. I need some validation that my feelings are okay. And so I encourage everyone to have a peer-run Warmline and continuum of support. I do ask that you do it keeping in mind the importance of who we are and why we do what we do and what we do, because that's our secret sauce. That's what makes us different from any other effort that's out there. And that's not to dismiss any other effort. I just want to make sure that we know what we are. And I want to speak a little bit about the 988 issue. So I've actually been on the Texas 988 planning work group. This is a challenge that in Texas has not been transparent. I'll put it that way. Every state is to develop their own plan. There is not money or funding to set it up, to build it up. There's planning money. There may be there's some initial gear up money, but in terms of really running 988, that's for each state to find the funding for. In Texas, it is not an accident that Texas is routinely 50th in per capita spending for mental health services in our nation. We stay at the bottom. We're one of the wealthiest states in the 50 states of the United States of America. And we are routinely, one year we were 51st. We were lower than, they included the District of Columbia that year. So we were 51st. So please, please, please be aware. The challenges will come from the culture you're navigating this in. And one of the things that has been batted around about 988 is being able to use one of the fees on phone bills to fund it. In Texas, that is considered taxation without representation. That is an added tax, and we will not raise taxes, period. That is the culture. So we're up against some really big challenges. 36%, I think it is, of the phone calls from Texas that go to the Lifeline are answered in Texas, 36%. All of the others are answered outside of Texas. So when you look at people from outside of your state using your line, it could be because there just isn't capacity in that state. And we don't have the capacity here in Texas. And our structures also here is that through our public mental health system, there's a requirement to have a full crisis continuum of care. What that means is risk assessment, intervention. We unfortunately have a great use of wellness checks. And my fear is as 988 rolls out, that is what it's going to look like in Texas. When I have raised that concern, I have been told that that's not what it is. And those are the, just a few of the calls that the call centers get. All of our call centers are run by local mental health authorities, and they are clinical in nature. Yes, we do have mobile teams that go out. Most of them do have a peace officer who is assigned to that mobile unit. And I have I personally, this is Anna Gray, have pushed 988 among the community of people with lived experience of mental health concerns, and for that matter, substance use concerns, because my fear is it's going to be business as usual. That said, and I'll finish right quick, I want y'all to have time to ask questions. There is one model that has been put forth in Colorado that I happen to have heard about that was amazing, which is what they're looking at is when people call 988, there is a requirement that there be a veteran line and, specialized lines. If you want to speak in Spanish, call, hit this number. That in that initial automated self triage, there be an option of, do you want to talk to a peer warm line and not anyone associated with crisis. And what that does is it bypasses the 988 system completely and refers it to a peer warm line. So it's not in the 988 system. It immediately just goes into the peer system. And then if there's, a need to, for whatever reason, although I haven't seen a need to call 911, then it's up to the warm line to follow their procedures on that. But it is not something that goes to 988. It is a very interesting approach. It requires a great deal of advocacy and building awareness about the impact of warm lines, the efficacy of warm lines, and the belief in self-determination and people knowing who they want to talk to. So those are some of the issues to consider. I hope that I've tried to address the waterfront. I didn't go into a lot of detail about our warm lines, but I hope that this is something that would be useful moving forward as we continue the conversation about increasing the number of warm lines in our country. So with that, I turn it over, Katie. I hope that there are some questions.
Holy moly. Anna and Cherene, really just what a wealth of knowledge and experience you've just shared with us. And I'm so appreciative because you've painted such a picture of all the dimensions that go into this, right? About capacity, about responding locally, about kind of advocacy that's needed for policy level decisions, and the challenges of just, who's going to answer the phone in the middle of the night or between 1 and 8 when we see the most calls. So everything that you said, just light bulbs going off. And I see in the chat, I don't know if you all saw, but just person after person validating and lifting up what you were saying about the importance of services, peer run supports being by peers, for peers, standalone, that independence, that autonomy, and the paradigm shift, the worldview shift that happens, and how maintaining that, if you are also in a culture that doesn't think that way, that is challenging, and not shying away from those challenges. So we have, 15 minutes, and I really just want to open it up to folks who have questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, please use the raise hand feature, and we will do some dialogue. This is a great opportunity. Please seize it.
And I just put my contact information in the chat for everybody.
Thank you so much.
Can I respond to a couple of comments, Katie, while we're waiting for other people to perhaps ask questions? So a couple of people talked about your own mobile crisis team and how it operates, and your own crisis line, having people with lived experience on the crisis line. So I want to really be very clear that this is not I am not saying that Warmlines or that crisis lines or mobile crisis lines, first of all, they're not all created equally. I'm not making a judgment about their effectiveness, but they do all operate very, very differently. And because 988 is being required federally, it also is requiring an infrastructure to have these mobile crisis team responses. But without consistency in the composition of those teams and the worldview and how they operate, I agree with you, Anna. My concern is it remains business as usual, but now we have even greater access into people's homes to bring them into handcuffs and shackles and either jail or hospitals, right? We have not shifted our philosophical understanding of emotional distress. We are not a trauma-informed system. It has not been designed that way. And so we are building out the access without building out the hows, right? How do we effectively support people without getting more of what we have gotten? In our state, we had to gather all the IVC data, and we had to do it ourselves. And we gathered 10 years of data from 100 counties and realized that our state is 91% increase in the use of involuntary commitment over 10 years. It's not trending downward. It's trending upward, right? So we are overusing confinement as a first response rather than a last resort. And my fear is if these things are not done well, we are going to continue to get more of that. So if you have a great mobile crisis team, I applaud you. We actually have a great mobile crisis team in my community. What we are finding and operating the Warmline is we are the exception in our community rather than the rule. And yet everybody's going to be looking at building mobile crisis in response to 988. And so we have to be really intentional about how it's done. In terms of crisis lines, employing people with lived experience, I would love every clinician to have lived experience. And yet I want to reiterate what Anna said. Being a clinician with a lived experience and being a peer supporter are not the same. We do not have the same code of ethics. We do not utilize the same tools. We don't have the same standards. The way we view and connect and reach people are very, very different. And it seems to have gotten confused along the way that a clinician with lived experience is the same as a peer supporter. And it isn't. I would hope that every clinician on a crisis line has lived experience. But that doesn't mean they're able to operate through the scope of practice of peer-to-peer mutuality and what we do as people with lived experience. So again, it's not a diss, it's just kind of the reality of what's happening nationally, not in any one community.
I see so many heads nodding about that and about how important it is. I think that really plays into big, as the state makes funding decisions, but also looks at peers and the role of peer support in the behavioral health workforce, in behavioral health systems, in crisis response. Preserving those boundaries is really important and takes a lot of advocacy and education and humility and vulnerability. I mean, Anna, your idea about suspending humanity really touched me. Because I don't think that's often spoken about or acknowledged, kind of what it takes, and how do we create learning pathways for people to take their lived experience and learn how to do that, right? How to kind of to create that space and to hold that space. So I see some hands up. So Rob, you had a question. Go for it.
Yeah, thank you. And it might be a little off the 988 topic, but I heard you both mention peer respites, peer run respites, which is not a term I've heard before. So just curious if you could give some clarification on what that is and what it isn't.
Cherene, I'm going to defer to you since you have one up and running.
Yeah, so we run a peer run respite here in our community. It is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week alternative to emergency department, police involvement, and hospitalization and involuntary commitment. think of it as sort of a healing space surrounded by people that have experienced mental health crises themselves, peer workers who are also specially trained in trauma, who know what it's like to walk into a space experiencing distress and vulnerability, and to frankly not get what they need or to even be harmed in the name of treatment. So a peer-run respite creates an alternative. Ours is unlocked, meaning that the only locks that we have in the entire space, it's kind of like a hotel. Everybody has their own bedroom with a queen size bed, and they have a lock on the outside of their door that they can have a code to that they don't have to give to anybody else. So guests can actually lock everybody else out. The team does not lock people in. So truly is the opposite of what you think of from inpatient or emergency department. We do a lot of alternative ways of healing. So anything from Reiki and drum circles to utilizing art to meditation to yoga to using culinary as a way to heal. Ours is staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have 2 peer supporters on the team at any given time. We can have 3 guests that can stay for up to 10 days, longer if needed. It is completely free. You do not need insurance for our respite. We do not bill anything. And when people come in, I know, right? Hallelujah. And when people come in, they get a $50 gift card to go to the grocery store, because every bedroom has its own mini fridge. There's communal space. Like we have 2, it's a big house. We have 9 bedrooms. We have 3 kitchens. We have 6 bathrooms, 2 living rooms. Like it's a beautiful space, but everybody in their own space has their own mini fridge, white sound machine, Wi-Fi, lockbox. And so they can go out, get their own food and leave it in their bedroom, or they can use it as communal food. What we find is people actually take all of their gift cards together and pool them, and then they do meals throughout the week together, because we have lots of people that come as guests that like to cook. What else? No segregation, no seclusion. We are completely zero force and zero barrier access for our respite. What did I miss, Anna? On the respite side.
The one thing I would add is that it's the space you set. So yes, it is all of that, but it is, it's a healing space where you get to go through what you're going through without it being interrupted or truncated. One of the things we see is that a lot of this is trauma related. And so when we try to tell people, oh, it's going to be okay, we're interrupting the healing process. Our brain is a remarkable organ with incredible ability to heal, but it has its own way of doing it, and it's not pretty, because it may look like hearing voices, and it may look like developing a whole new reality so we feel safe. And a respite is a place that has the capacity for all of that without judgment.
Right.
And that becomes important.
Thank you so much. You really, I see in the chat, lots of people like excited about this, like that this sounds amazing. And I just want to thank my colleague, Denise. The idea of peer run respites has been kind of marinating in Maryland for quite a while. And so I do really think about the attention, not just the attention that the pandemic has brought to behavioral health, but also to the attention that 988 will create. And I hear you loud and clear. So many people now being able to reducing one barrier also puts pressure on all the other parts of the system. And if we haven't built out alternatives, if we haven't, created trauma-informed spaces or healing-centered spaces, people are just walking into what already so many peers have experienced as not being supportive to their wellness. So that now, I think, 988 goes live in July. That's March, April, May, June, July. It's 5 months. But over the next 5 months, I think, and I want to do this call out to everyone here in the peer community, this is the moment to really advocate, to use our voices, to talk to local leaders, community leaders and folks who are in charge of policy decision making about the importance of alternatives, about the importance of updating standards for what we have. I hear loud and clear that idea of, if your mobile crisis teams don't look the same in every region, especially if they involve law enforcement as a default, that really is going to impact what happens when people call and if they will call at all. So I think I hope that in everything we've talked about, the one message that just comes through so clearly is we need to use our voices now to raise up all of these concerns and questions and issues before decisions are made, not after. I mean, this is I think the other thing folks were asking about the morning session, where we had some state and regional leaders and someone from a call center talk about kind of how the system is preparing for 988 specifically. And it's the idea that this is rapidly evolving, these plans. Like the planning is still ongoing. So there's still lots of opportunities. Leah Letha, I see that you've had your hand raised for a while. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes. Oh my God. This is so phenomenal. I'm sick right now. I should be laying in the bed getting better, but I am so blown over by the amount of information that is so positive. I have hope. I mean, my goodness, if I had this back when I was going through suicidal issues or mental illness, I don't know. I think I would have been a more productive citizen now. I just want to say thank you all. And thank you for Cherene and Anna for just talking about what you do. I have a question about medication. One of the barriers that I see, especially for people of color, is access to quality and medication, or access to medication for immediate relief. I'm meaning Xanax or the new stuff that's coming out, psychedelics. How do you see that playing in? Because sometimes one of the things that came up is to have people have immediate relief in a hospital. They normally give people a shot of lorazepam and everything. They help them calm down. During this type, I still believe that people still need help with that part too, because they might be still on edge. How would you incorporate medication distribution, management, and are you scared to deal with a Schedule II drugs?
Anna, do you want to go on this one? You want me to start?
Well, I'll jump in, and then I'm real interested in what you have to say as well, Cherene. So in a peer crisis respite setting, people have a locked cubby or a locked place. They manage their own medication. They bring their own medication. They manage their own medication. If in the process of working with them, that's one of the things they're requesting. From a peer perspective, it's how do we support you in finding the provider you need to get you what you want. So it's not that we would bring anybody in as much as that we would encourage you to realize you've got everything you need to get what you want. Let's help you to get the language so you know what kind of person to call to get what it is you need. So that's a very simple, straightforward answer. I'm gonna turn it over to Cherene. I want you to get all the perspectives, and so I'm gonna leave it at that.
No, that is definitely a perspective of at the respite. You know, we have created this narrative that what we call mental illness is a chemically based brain disease. And I don't have time to go into all of that, but we have over-pharmaed to death this idea that if I'm experiencing distress, I need to take medications to feel calm on the inside out. When what we know is the result of a lot of trauma, our nervous systems get activated and can feel to us not comfortable or not regulated, but very familiar if you're a trauma survivor. So we do not discount the role of psychotropic medications if that is a path, but we also want to right size it in messaging and really support people to open their worldview, not just a worldview that has been sold to us as clients or consumers of mental health services, but as people that have these experiences that literally have everything we need inside our bodies to heal, but have never really been taught or tapped into the wisdom that our bodies hold. And so simultaneously as a peer-run respite or peer community to supporting people to find whatever pathway to well-being that they have, including psychotropic medications, we simultaneously also support people to understand the impact of trauma on our bodies, how that has shifted our thoughts, how that changes our worldview, our feelings of safety. I have had so much trauma work in my life. I came into mental health services when I was around 13. And instead of recognizing that I was experiencing sexual abuse at home, my therapists and clinicians focused on the fact that I had an eating disorder, and they focused on the behavior, right? So the treatment was coercive. It was, if you don't start eating, we're going to hospitalize you and you're going to get a feeding tube, and showing me pictures of women that are emaciated. You guys know the deal. Very, very behavior based. So they would do all of that and blame, shame, and guilt me, and I would go home and experience sexual abuse. And none of them saw my behavior as the outward manifestation of internal distress. Fast forward, it wouldn't be to many, many years later, and walking away from the treatment community personally, that I would find trauma-based work and start understanding that what I was experiencing inside my body, of course I was experiencing it, given what I've gone through, but I'm at a place in my life where my body doesn't need to be that heightened. That's my very long-winded way of saying there's an and in all of this. And this messaging that we've created, that your brain is diseased and you need psychotropic medications, and then periodically you need to be confined, and all of this sort of stuff, we've created this much of an understanding of mental health. And it's not even our own narrative. It's a narrative that's been sold to us. So where peer worker communities come in is we expand that awareness, and then people choose the truths for themselves. You know, people might come back and go, no, I just need meds. All good. There's no judgment in it. We are going to support you to access what you feel like you need at this time. We would be negligent if we did not explore all different ways of healing and wellness with people. Sorry, I got long-winded there, but it's a big topic.
Oh, I saw so many people in the chat, heads nodding, heartfelt. And I want to be conscious of time and knowing that that folks' schedules are often packed, and we've been together for a long time. But we cannot thank you enough for coming and sharing not just your practical, very thoughtful kind of recommendations and experiences, but everything you've just spoken about that paradigm shifting, worldview shifting understanding of what it means, to be someone who uses behavioral health services, and about the importance of taking this moment and transforming that, of holding spaces where there's an alternate way of understanding that people, to reactivate our own capacities for healing, for healing together. I think that's the other really big piece of this. So because we're coming just right up on time, I do want to pause our conversation and to just ask folks to please give a really big round of applause to our guest presenters, however you like to do that, in the chat and the video. So many cameras coming on, which always means that what you're saying is resonating with folks. I'm just going to ask, this is, a big event like this is one of the things that Honor of Maryland does, but we also offer many trainings for peers, many with CPRS CEUs, if that's part of your journey, but about stigma, about recovery, about wellness, about the 8 dimensions, about activating, self-help strategies. And we also do a tremendous amount of advocacy work. So if you will, please, follow us on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, check out our website for upcoming trainings. This is a moment for our community to, not that we aren't connected already, like we know we are connected already, but where I think we need to make those networks more visible and come together with one voice for systems change.